Hey there, this is Ryan on episode 40 of No Code, No Problem. Today's episode is brought to you by Adolo. Adolo is a powerful no-code tool that you can use to build mobile and web apps in minutes. I featured Adolo on episode 2 before they were a sponsor, and I highly recommend you check them out at adolo.com. Use the code No Code, No Problem to get 20% off your first 6 months, or use my referral link in the description. So today I have Robert Bai with me, a project manager. He's come into the no-code space, and I'm excited to have him on the podcast.
It's great to be here as well. Thanks for the invite.
Of course. So I'm going to start just with some background information. I found Robert through No Code Devs. He was promoting one of your more recent courses.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a one on kind of like how to design, validate, and launch, usually like side project ideas and kind of potential no-code things.
Awesome, which is really valuable in the no-code space as you are, starting, launching projects, side projects at least very fast.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there's I think a lot of times people when they're building side projects kind of build things from a sense of I want to learn something new or try something different, but it's really this course is kind of geared around how to ensure the idea is validated before investing too much time. So yeah, if you want to build something for fun, that's great. But if you want to build something that's going to become like a business or have a big user base, it's really important to try and validate that potential before moving forward with it.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's start with your background. So a little bit about you and your background and kind of how it pertains to the no-code space. I know you've worked at Google and some other companies, so I'm sure the listeners would love to hear about that.
Yeah, definitely. So my background's kind of an interesting one, especially when it comes to working in software. So my background is actually initially in industrial design. So that's kind of the design of hardware products. So things like phones, computers, bikes, chairs, pretty much anything that's making things with like particles and materials rather than like pixels. So that was kind of my background, and started life as a industrial designer. Started my own agency with a university friend, and I ran that with her for around 2 years before we kind of spun out digital product, which I then became like the founder of. We raised some like funding from VC funds in London, and then kind of from there, after wrapping up that company, moved into freelancing for a venture capital fund where I worked in a kind of like an R&D team, helping them build, design, validate, launch potential startups. So very much around looking for like market opportunities for new ideas. We launched some things in like the influencer space within edtech, some travel tech stuff as well. So again, very much around like defining and deciding like what opportunities are worth building products in. And then after that role, went and freelanced at Google for around a year, where I worked in a team called the Creative Lab, which again is kind of like an R&D style team where we were playing around with AI, machine learning, kind of using Magenta, which is Google's like AI music sort of platform, and looking at kind of creating new products and interesting things in that space, as well as some hardware, software things as well. Ended up kind of helping the team there launch something at Google I/O in I think 2017 or so. Then most recently moved from London to New York, where I'm now working at Fueled, which is a like product design and engineering agency where we work with startups and corporates helping build, design, and launch software products. So kind of an interesting road going from like hardware through to software, which is often not a common path. And I think what's interesting is because of my backgrounds in like design and engineering, but actually like mechanical engineering, not software engineering. I've never been able to write code, never been able to build anything myself. And especially when that's working every day with teams of developers, it's always kind of an interesting space to sit there where I understand how development works, understand languages we use, understand different platforms and services, but I can't write code myself, which means when it comes to playing with side projects or startups, often end up using a huge number of no-code tools to validate those ideas. And a lot of that learning has come from things like working in VC funds and startups, where it's so critical to be able to build stuff very, very quickly, which is what no-code's perfect for.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that we can kind of transition that into how do you think, product management and your background in that and sort of biz development has affected your ability to, operate in the no-code space and creating something more than just like an idea, and how that's not enough. Yeah,
I think it's an interesting question. I think no code's an interesting one because it's only in the last kind of few years become more of a community, but prior to that like WordPress has existed for, I'm sure, over a decade now, probably.
Yeah.
And I remember using Squarespace in the early days before it even had any kind of complex functionality. It was like pre-e-commerce functionality and had pretty much just the blog platform. And it's interesting because I've always used those tools where they weren't really considered no code. They were just considered like website builders. And that was always been something that we've used to build landing pages, build sign up forms, build very quick products to test with. And I think it's what's been really interesting is my role as like a product manager is using those tools in conjunction with like a team of 6 developers. So to actually build and validate and work very leanly and not having to spend 3-4 weeks designing and building out a hardcore product, but actually being able to spin something up in a matter of hours to kind of test something, whether it be a new feature or more often than not when I was working for NVC, like testing out ideas and seeing if you can validate something prior to actually spending a huge amount of resource and time building things. And I think no-code tools are an interesting one with product managers because we're only starting to see how we can actually use a lot of those tools ourselves to validate things. And rather than having to spend expensive developers' time on building products, we can use no-code tools to quickly test things out prior to going into build. So it's interesting seeing the no-code kind of stack be integrated in an early phase of actual proper product development, rather than relying on spending 2 weeks to build a landing page. You can do things within hours now, which is great. Yeah.
So do you think that a lot of project managers that are going to be kind of leading teams of developers are going to need to have, like, it'll give them an advantage if they can integrate no-code tools before they push things to their developers?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like product management is interesting because it's a kind of a nondescript role that people come to from design, user experience, development. So product managers have very different skill sets, and I think some of them are technical and some of them can code, especially front end. Most people can do like CSS or HTML and kind of can build things up pretty quickly. But then for the kind of product managers like myself who come from a more creative design background, that's when no-code tools become really powerful and actually allow kind of us to compete at an even level with those more technical product managers, because we can not only understand how to communicate with developers, but we can actually build and validate things very quickly. And as product management inherently is becoming more and more important to understand user experience and like business knowledge, and it's product managers sit in between like the business team, the engineering team, and the design team and marketing team. You have to kind of understand a bit of everything, and that's when no code tools become really, really powerful, because you can understand those things, those people, and then use the tools to validate your assumptions. And I think that's what product management is really about, and that's what no-code tools are extremely, extremely useful for, especially in the last few years when they've become much more powerful and you can pivot, like you can run a back end off Airtable now, and that's amazing to be able to do that rather than having to pull resource in from a back end developer for a week or so.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So, we talk about it in like a small project management role, but complete companies are being built with these no-code tools. So, I mean, how do you think that differs than just a small team working on a small part of a company compared to somebody building out their entire company with no-code tools?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously, no-code, when it comes to more kind of, I guess, like enterprise solutions and like commercial space, it's still siloed to the early stage stuff, except for maybe a few more powerful tools like Webflow, when you can actually ship production ready kind of tools using it. But I think in the make space, especially, that's when no code tool is amazing for being able to really quickly build things. And I think a lot of people come into no code from kind of a maker mentality, which is still incredibly useful to be able to, you want to learn, you want to make things, you want to build stuff, often because you have a problem, you want to solve it yourself and you want to build something to solve that. And that's amazing for no code. But I think more so when people are starting to think about these side hustles and being able to make revenue out of them, being able to generate some income with the kind of either the goals to like augment your main salary to have enough to travel or enough to kind of buy yourself a new computer. But people who are actually now wanting to make things into a business. And it's really amazing because it allows people who come from design backgrounds, kind of early stage developers, or people who are more entrepreneurial, or people who kind of just end up in the no code maker space. I think it's really interesting and critical to understand like when is a good time to build for the sense of this is going to be a fun learning experience and something that I just want to create, to I want to be more strategic with how I'm investing my time and I want to make this into a potential future business. And I think that's like a really interesting transition and different mindset that needs to happen prior to starting a project. Like, am I building this for fun, or am I building this to create an audience to launch a paid product for, or do I want to make a paid product that people will actually pay monthly or one time for? And that's, I think no code's still relatively new-ish to that space, and especially in the more kind of like the maker side of things, having that more kind of strategic biz dev thinking behind what you're doing is really important, and how to leverage no code tools for those purposes is a vital kind of stepping stone as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting seeing the space in terms of the makers that use it, and then also seeing the enterprise level no code companies like Uncork, who partners and builds no code software for like banks like Merrill Lynch and like the top 1%, Liberty Insurance, things like that, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how their teams are integrating it compared to like smaller, just like makers like yourself and myself.
Yeah, these like kind of no code agencies are really interesting because it allows them to be incredibly lean and work very, very fast, which means like I think there's still some inherent kind of a glass ceiling with no code tools when it comes to like how big of an enterprise software can you build with no code yourself. And I think that kind of ceiling's pushed, and it's amazing seeing how advanced you can get. But I think it's that early stage makers, and like how are they bridging the gap from kind of these ideas and moving into kind of when they have these kind of fun concepts that maybe have like 10 users or 100 users or even 1,000 users, kind of how do they take those things and build them for a bigger market and actually start generating kind of meaningful income. And it's been amazing seeing those things grow and grow in the last kind of months and years, of how people are starting to make a decent living off these kind of things. Even people who are building these no code tools like Sheet to Site, and the people kind of doing those things are now building enough complexity in the no code software to support other no coders, and that's actually making them enough value to kind of like build a career from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. So I'm just out of curiosity, what platform do you think is going to be the first unicorn? Like, what no code platform do you think? A lot of people say Webflow, a lot of people say Bubble. I'm just curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, they're kind of very different, I guess, because like Webflow is like I've only dipped into it literally in the last month or so. And I think it is ridiculously powerful. I think what's interesting is you can see how they've gone from being very, very like accessible and simple to now pushing much harder into kind of front end engineering. And you do need some knowledge of how web is built to start using those things, because it's not like Card where anyone can use it, or Squarespace where it's designed very much for a non-technical person. Webflow is designed for people who understand technology to a certain point, at least, because there's language they use where it's not completely accessible. So I think Webflow has like amazing potential to be like a tool that's used especially by agencies and businesses who want to be able to build things really quickly, and want that flexibility, but do have people who understand like what a div block is, for instance, because if you don't know what that is, you really can't use Webflow very well, and it's not like the most basic language to use. And yeah, I think Webflow will be incredibly powerful as a kind of enterprise level mass market appeal. And I think them, as they pivot more into that kind of how can you actually work directly with like project managers and designers and marketing teams who don't need a full engineering team to support it, and maybe just like one technical project manager or product manager to actually run it. And that I think gives them a real big edge when it comes to that, like who's going to be the first $1 billion company. I think that kind of is fascinating. And then like Shopify, is technically a no code tool, and they are huge. So I guess like they're probably the ones who are like the market leaders in like who has the most customers, especially as like during the pandemic, pretty much every small business has now used Shopify, which is generating them absolutely tons of revenue. So yeah, I think those two are the ones that are like that they're serving businesses at a very accessible level. And then you obviously got ones like Airtable that are more kind of the kind of no code backend systems that are really, really interesting, and seeing how they scale over time will be fascinating. But yeah, in my kind of gut feeling is those three are the ones that are like, they have a big enough market reach and enough scale. Things like Card are going to be huge, and they are pretty big already, but I don't think they'll ever kind of they're not set up to serve the same market, which I think is a very wise
No.
decision from them. And they serve a purpose, and they will become a very big business. But to the scale of Shopify and Webflow, they're serving the right people to get that big scale, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm actually really happy you brought up Shopify, and I'm not sure why people in the no code space don't bring it up. I don't think they bring it up enough. Like whenever Elliot was around, Elliot positioned themselves as the no code tool for e-commerce, right?
Yeah,
But nobody ever really talked. But like Shopify, like you said, Shopify is a no code tool, hands down. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
So, and they are a billion-dollar company. So
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
but and same goes with Squarespace and Wix. But I think a lot of people are like focused more on like the newer no code companies like the Webflows and the Bubbles and the Builders and the Adolos.
Yeah, and I think those ones are kind of appealing because they have that, because they're kind of built and they very much market to that extent. Whereas Shopify is now, it's known just for being like an online e-com builder. And it's kind of almost, it sounds weird, but it's almost stepped out of that no code realm just to being like, if you're a small business who needs a store, you use Shopify. And I think Squarespace is like kind of trying and has been trying to bridge that with all the e-com stuff for a while, but they've never really hammered that home. And even when you look at kind of like the landing page of Shopify versus Squarespace, they're promoting different things. And Squarespace is like, I'm a website builder, create your like portfolio site, create your online presence, create your online brand. Whereas Shopify is like, I make you an e-com store really easily. That's what you want. So I think like, yeah, it is interesting how people don't think of Shopify as a no-code tool because it is, but I think it's because they've just transitioned into the space now where it's no longer people who are like tinkering around with the online store. It's businesses who want to use it and make stores from it. And I think that's kind of why it feels different. Whereas Webflow is much more of like an interesting tool to tinker with and customize and use. And Shopify just, it helps you sell things online very efficiently. And lots of people who run stores don't want to tinker. They want to have a product online and they can sell and make money from. And that's why they're serving that market very differently. So, but yeah, it's interesting how it's kind of, it's still less thought of, but yeah, Webflow has a lot of power and I think a lot of flexibility, but sometimes like a corner shop doesn't want that, or like a small kind of boutique store doesn't necessarily want to play around for a few weeks changing the exact layout of their site. They just want something that looks good, has the logo on, and has the products kind of displayed very well.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a very good point. And I think that's how Elliot positioned themselves. You could change the basic coloring, you could add the logo, and then your stuff was ready to sell. So,
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because like, I wonder if there's a space for kind of the more maker style things like Card to offer basic storefront things, whether it's integration with like Gumroad, which they kind of like half do. But yeah, it'd be interesting seeing if what is a step down from Shopify, or is Shopify so easy you don't really need that. But it is expensive. I guess that's the one drawback. It does cost a lot of money.
yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. There are some tools I know that are actually being built with like Bubble that are like you start your own storefront. You can change basic coloring, and you can change things like that. Let me get the name. It's being built by a kid in Canada named Kato. It's called. I'll have to get that for you in a
Yeah,
minute. But
that's fine.
but it's just cool because there's literally e-commerce platforms being built on no code. Like you can
Yeah.
realistically you could build out an e-commerce store on Bubble, but now people are literally building out e-commerce stores for e-commerce stores on Bubble.
Yeah, which is crazy when you start thinking about that. And yeah, I'd be fascinated to see like what is a space that sits between kind of like Gumroad, which is very functional, and Shopify, which is much more customizable. And it's kind of, is there a space in between the two that is kind of like Card for e-com? And it'd be interesting seeing like if Gumroad starts to branch out into that customization, because they're a great tool, and like I've used them for like pre-ordering and things like that, and it's so quick to spin up. But yeah, it'd be interesting seeing like is there like a bridge between the two where it's still serving people who maybe only want to sell one or two digital products and don't need a Shopify store for that, and don't want to spend like, was it like $30 a month probably, and like plus every single like percentage fee on payments as well. So yeah, it's interesting for sure.
So I just got the name for it. It's called thrift.so. That's what it's called. But it's like building your own online thrift store. No monthly fees, no transaction fees. It's pretty sweet.
That's cool. So I'll
But
take
you
a look
build
at
it
that.
all with Bubble. Yeah, you have to check it out.
Oh wow, that's
So,
amazing.
so tell us more about the course. I know no code devs, they started promoting it for you. sort of like what inspired it, and is there going to be more courses to come?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So it kind of obviously over my kind of career, I've been working with a lot of like early stage founders in kind of VC world or in startups when it came to working on the agency side. And a lot of the time it comes down to kind of founders have amazing ideas and want to build something, but either they're so convinced they have the right idea and they're not willing to test it, or they're not quite sure how to test things quickly. And often what I've ended up doing is like walking through founders and helping them understand, like, if you have a really idea for a complex product, how to kind of wind that back to something that is really easy to build. So like something like in your head, maybe you have a really complex, like two-sided marketplace for, I don't know, buying and selling pushchairs in like prams in your area or something like that, something kind of random. But you inherently, the founder wants to kind of build that to test it, but it's looking at how can you build this and get this back to something that's really simple to build. And maybe it's just a no-code platform where you can quickly list out what you have for sale and allow people to kind of message you about it, or try how you basically cut back these complex ideas that could be like enterprise level billion-dollar ideas, but bringing them back to something that's very simple. Like Instagram, when it first launched, it was literally you could share a photo and you could kind of like comment on it. That's pretty much it. Or even before then, it was like you could upload a photo and add a filter, and you can do a lot of those things with no code now, and it allows you to really quickly test things. So the kind of idea came about is I always run these workshops, and like 3-4 day workshops with clients or with startup founders or with even like people who are working in startup studios trying to find new ideas to kind of invest in. It's basically applying all of those learnings from like the last like 5-10 years and packaging it into what I do with clients and what I've done at like Google and what I've done at these like VC funds. And the idea is to help someone who has either like a rough idea of something they want to build, or just like they want to start elevating their idea something a bit more, and looking at how you can really come back to like, what is the problem you're solving with this idea? Is there a business opportunity behind it? Then looking at using how to use like design and branding and tools like Figma, and to really think more creatively and using existing like UI toolkits to create these great visuals that make your product seem a lot more real, and then how to kind of guide that towards a way to validate it. More often than not, the best way is to communicate what your like product value proposition is, understand what you're selling to someone and why they should want it, and then how to communicate that on like a landing page to get people to sign up. Because the best way to get validation is someone to pay you money for something, but they're not going to pay that unless they have the product to buy. So there's kind of like the chicken and egg situation. And I think the best way to do that is to get them to kind of give up their email address and show express interest through that sign up. So the whole course basically takes you from, I had this idea for a really cool project or product. How can I check this is real? Through the kind of design phase, mocking up wireframes, mocking up like user flow diagrams, understanding the business value, the proposition behind it. And then the end goal will be like a very custom, very well designed landing page, most likely in card, but synced up so you can track conversions using Google Analytics and monitor those kind of the data behind it to make sure that what you're going to build is actually valuable to someone. And then from there onwards, the kind of like other courses I'm working on is then how to validate them with no-code tools, and then later on how to like monetize that and turn it from a kind of a side project into a potential startup and a business from there. So yeah, the first one is very much geared towards like the strategic thinking behind product strategy and what I learned at like Google and venture capital funds of just how to very quickly understand, is this a good idea for me, or is it a good idea that could actually become a product and a business in the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I have two comments based on what you said. So the first thing is, bringing up venture capital and stuff, like from the VCs that I've spoken to and the angels, they love no-code tools, especially whenever non-technical founders use them to gain that initial traction and gain that insight into their market before they start reaching out to them trying to get money. Because, for a while there, people were just trying to raise money so they could afford to build out like a first version of their product. Now it's accessible so people can build out that first version, get the insight, and then they can raise the capital, which then allows you to use that capital more meaningfully.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what people should be doing as well. And I think that is the beauty of no code, is these founders, if you have an idea, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to build things with the tools available. And if you think your idea is too complex to build in no code, you have not really worked out what your value proposition is. So, for instance, kind of one of the product I'm building through the course, and the whole idea is for the course is I build something with people to show how I'm doing it. And the idea is like an app for newsletters, so like a podcast app for newsletters. So you can have a custom email, you subscribe to newsletters online, and instead of having to trawl through your own inbox, you can see them in your app in one place and just like mark them as read, share them, star them, favorite them, kind of whatever. And obviously that's like a custom built app. You can't really build that with no code tools that easily because you need a way to serve emails and to have a backend system that kind of pushes that through to people's apps, and it's very complex. But so the idea is like, how can I validate that? So something that I've been working on is like, how do you pull this idea back to an MVP? And the MVP was basically kind of like product hunt for newsletters. So a way to share the best newsletters and upvote them. And then you can then go in, just see which ones are the most well rated and like the best tech ones, the best design ones, the best entrepreneur newsletters, and find them. And that was like a no code solution that then shows like an appetite and starts giving me an audience in that space of like newsletter curation. So yeah, if you think you can't build a product with no code tools, you definitely haven't worked out what you're trying to solve or who you're solving it for, and then worked out how to solve that really quickly. And that's kind of what VCs are looking for is, yeah, it might be great. You've got this really, really complex, amazing business proposition, but you need to understand what an MVP looks like. And if you don't know what that is, that's an issue. And that's a real big flag with investors as well. If you can't work out how to simplify something so much that you can build it with no code tools, because yeah, if startups effectively have value in one of two things. Either it's the technology, which means it's like an AI, machine learning, very complex thing, maybe using like cryptocurrencies, maybe using blockchain, maybe using other kind of visual recognition. And that is obviously they're not no-code products because they are incredibly complex and your IP is in the technology you're building, or the value is in your audience and your user base. And in that case, no-code tools, you should be able to start with them at some level for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention was for, like you'd mentioned Instagram, like you can build your own Instagram with no code tools, right? And wow, that is really cool. There's really no point in building, an Instagram clone. It's not like you're going to replace Instagram with your like no code Instagram tool. But one thing that I do see becoming popular is like these micro communities, and no code is one of them, where there are like social medias just for no code, and there's a lot of just groups and things like that for no code. So I think there's a lot of value using no code tools to build out communities for these subgroups, whether that be for no code or fly fishing or for Raspberry Pis, like literally anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what's like the value is these kind of micro communities are amazing for getting some solutions out there. And you look and kind of, if it's not, there's two ways of going about no code stuff. It's either you're building things to learn tools. So you build a no code tool, Instagram clone using no code tools, or you replicate product hunt using no code. And that's kind of a good value to kind of understand behind the scenes why things working. But if you can actually understand like what is a really unique value proposition, what is a unique business idea, you can then use those tools to leverage into that audience and find that niche and what that audience looks like. And if you solve a problem for enough people, it either is a really big problem for a few people, which you can then charge a lot of money for, or it's a small problem by a massive audience and you haven't got to charge much because you have a big reach. And it's kind of understanding the dynamic of people pay money because you're making their lives better or more enjoyable or saving them time. And it's then looking at how you can, find business ideas within that area, validate them using no-code software and kind of techniques behind that to make sure that you are building something that is of use. Because, you don't need 10, 20, 100 more Instagram clones with no users. But there are communities out there who have small problems. And I think there's definitely value in, you could build 10 side projects, each serving a few hundred users, and you could earn a living off that, as long as you're serving those users very well. And it's just, it depends on the mindset you have of like, who are you really solving these problems for? And that's kind of, not to go back to the course too much, but that's one really important thing is like understanding who your user base is. And we try and cover that of like, what is your functional user group? Who are your target market? Why did they want your product? And how do you explain to them how your product makes their lives better with that thing? Because it's such an important part of business.
Yeah, absolutely. So, no code has really impacted a lot of lives. And I've talked to a lot of people that have been empowered by no code. So I'm curious to hear, how has no code personally empowered you, and how do you foresee it giving you opportunity in the future?
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it's that being a non-technical product manager is an inhibitor in some ways because a technical product manager can communicate with devs better. They can sometimes jump in and help with the front end. They can really be there to like support the team and go deep on like maybe they're really good on deep technology and understand how to set up like complex databases and like NoSQL search it, all those sort of more complex things. But then as me as a non-technical product manager, I theoretically and hope I do have like good understanding of like user bases and customer acquisition and creativity and design and UX, but no code allows me to actually be able to validate that with data, not just theory, and kind of partnering that with good user research and partnering that with working with developers allows kind of product managers to have this kind of extra really unique tool set where you can very quickly iterate products without relying on devs. And I think the more the product manager position becomes augmented by no code, the better the products will be that are created by those teams, because it allows us to really quickly and rapidly validate things. And I think, yeah, for me, it's been amazing because it's meant that not only can I spin up side projects really quickly and kind of have a creative outlet in some way. So I'm not just sitting in the projects I'm on at work. I can actually come home in the evenings. I can tinker. I can play around with new side project ideas. And I haven't got to wait for a developer to be free or paid to do something. And I think it's going to be pretty powerful tool when it comes to like me as a PM to be able to show that I can create business opportunities and validate ideas, whether it be for my own company or for potential clients. And I think that's something that's really interesting. And yeah, I'm really intrigued to see why as no code kind of drips out of its kind of community and comes more into the kind of tech space, and seeing how more traditional development teams of like designers, front end, back end, iOS, Android developers, how they leverage these tools for their use. Because I haven't seen much of it yet, but I would love to see like if you gave a developer with 10 years experience some no code software like Webflow, how quickly they could build things in that, because they just speak that same language. And I'd be fascinated to see like, yeah, as these tools kind of bridge that gap between non-developer to developer and coming to development teams, how it's, yeah, augments that flow. So yeah, I'm just excited to see how that starts to work.
So do you foresee yourself staying within project management, or do you want to start, your own company using no code tools, or how do you foresee yourself? Like I know we keep talking about side projects. Like, do you want to run a bunch of side projects and then make your living off that?
Yeah, it's a tough one because I've like working at bigger companies like Google and stuff. It has its perks and it is amazing, kind of building software for thousands, if not millions, of people, or tens of millions, or like billions in the case of Instagram. And I think there's definitely benefits of kind of working on those businesses. And I think kind of working for companies like that is amazing, because even though you're in charge of a very small kind of slice of the pie, and there's always a joke about like Facebook product managers are in charge of like the like button and they optimize that all the time. But the fact that your product gets used by billions of people is kind of an amazing experience. Whereas working on side projects gives you full control and autonomy, and you can kind of play around with those things. So I think for me, it's like, I always love working for bigger companies and being able to kind of help startups grow. And that's kind of the bit I love, is that kind of early mid-stage startup where their teams between like 10 and kind of 50 people, and you're really trying to work out what you're doing. And I think that's when no code really comes into its own, when you're trying to validate like who your customers are, what do they want from your business, and how you can quickly test out new features. And I think for me, that's kind of, no code will always be something that I play with the side, and maybe we'll spin up a few side projects. Some of them will hopefully be profitable and will kind of have its own kind of small niches and people will like using them. But yeah, it's kind of, I think for me, I do love that aspect of like, there is a benefit to being a startup with developers and venture capitally backed business, because you can grow very quickly. But at the same time, you end up kind of serving your investors, serving your, like the business but idea behind it. So I think for me, it's always going to be something that I use in tandem and love exploring and playing around with and learning, and then seeing how you can apply that to more kind of enterprise level. But who knows? I think there's a lot of people who end up accidentally starting a business on the side that becomes really big. And I think even like Product Hunt back in the day was pretty tiny. It was a side project and it got very, very, very big. And then I think it was like acquired by AngelList as well. So yeah, you never know these things, how quickly they can grow.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're going to be doing like one of the sponsorships that Product Hunt has for our launch on November 2nd for V1. And for the homepage for a day and for their email newsletter, I think it runs $4,000, right, for one day.
Yeah.
And as of yesterday, they were booked every single day until November 2nd.
Yeah. So, and it's insane. And like, yeah, it shows that like you can make a product hunt replica in literally 10 minutes if you want to. And it shows that like for them, it's not the technology, it's the audience, and that captive audience is so valuable. So if you can build something that serves the right market, you can build something that is a huge business from it. And I think it's going to be really interesting seeing like what is, as you kind of start at the beginning, like what is the first $1 billion business, but not the one that serves the no code community, the one that has been built on no code, and like how far can you push that with growth and your audience size and venture capital backed businesses, or like, yeah, what is the limit of that? And it'd be interesting to know even now, like what is the biggest business out there that has a non-technical team that's using no-code tools to build it. And I'm sure it's Shopify, like a Shopify store, but that's kind of a different thing, I guess, because they're selling something else through no-code rather than no-code being the thing that is the business. So yeah.
Well, I know there was a company called Dividend. It was built on Bubble, and they've raised, I think, $365 million in funding.
Wow.
I don't know if they probably don't use Bubble anymore for, everything, but yeah. I know they started on Bubble.
Yeah, honestly, it'd be fascinating to see like what are some of the biggest no-code companies out there now. And I think, there's evidence that obviously being a no-code provider like Shopify or Webflow or Squarespace is very profitable. But yeah, how big are the people leveraging those tools? And I think that's where it's interesting is like, where is the limit of no-code businesses, and how far can you push them before you start requiring development teams and even custom code blocks? Like how long can you last until you need that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Robert, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. It was really great hearing from you and your perspective from the project management standpoint.
No, it's great to be here, and it's always fun to chat about kind of what things are going on in the no-code community, and hearing how things are progressing, because it's been it's a new community and one that's growing, and I think the tools are so valuable for everyone from like an indie maker all the way through to like corporate and enterprise level establishments. And I think it's a great community to be a part of.
Absolutely. Where can people find you at?
So I am on Twitter at Robert J. By, or my course is on howtoproduct.co. So that's where I am.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, Robert.
No worries. Thank you for your time as well. It's been great to chat.